Between the orbit of Saturn and Uranus lives an asteroid with a little name and an even bigger purpose. Before you can move beyond the limitations of your current 3D reality and enter the age of Aquarius, you must cross the Rainbow Bridge, become your own shaman, and heal yourself. You hold the key to the fifth dimension, and you are the medicine. This is the Chronicles of Chyron.
Hello, star people. Thank you for joining me today on Chronicles of Chyron. I'm your host, Chrystopher Kyng. I'm a Chyronic Healer, medicine alchemist, Shamanic Astrologer, and Ascension guide. And in this space, we dive deep into all things ascension, awakening, astrology, extra-dimensionals, plant medicine, and of course, healing. Chyron is an asteroid named after the mythological centaur known as the Wounded Healer, but in 5D astrology, he is just the healer, the shaman, and the rainbow bridge. And as a living embodiment of Chyron, I am here to assist you in bridging the gap between dimensions, assisting you in tapping out of the false matrix and into your highest, most divine self. I am so excited to be here with you all today. This is the first episode of this podcast, and I wanted to start it off with a bang by introducing myself and really setting the tone for what this podcast and what my mission here on this planet is all about. So first and foremost, again, I am Chrystopher with a Y. Why, you ask? Well, we'll get to that. And it's very important because we also spell many different things in my universe with a Y. And I like to say it's Y and not I as we move forward into this fifth dimension, this 5D that everyone keeps talking about. During this time, I'm going to share with you who is Chyron, who is Chrystopher, what my mission is, but also what my background is, how I got to this point, and let you in a little bit more in my seemingly repelling and very hard to understand mysterious manifestor aura. So anyone listening to this podcast, you most likely are interested in spirituality, astrology, all things consciousness. Well, human design is one of those topics of discussion in the spiritual community now. And so there will be a lot of human design talk on this podcast. I don't really assign myself to many belief systems. I don't necessarily think that every system is correct for me at every time. I always check in with my higher self and my intuition, and I encourage my clients and my listeners to do so as well. So at any point during this episode or any episode of the Chronicles of Chyron podcast, I really encourage you to check in with your body pendulum, check in with your heart, check in with your intuition. Is something that Chrystopher or one of his guests saying, is it right for me? Is it resonating with me? There are an infinite number of realities that we're shifting in and out of every millisecond. What makes us think that the reality we're creating in this moment is the only one or the one that is correct? So, before we begin, we're going to open our hearts and we're going to open our minds to the infinite possibilities of this incredible universe. And I am fortunate to be living in a human body incarnated on planet Earth, but have access to all kinds of different realms. And it's so important that we all understand that we all have access to all of these different realms. And it's not just Chrystopher. It's not just the people on social media. It's not just those people on Gaia Network. You also have medicine within you. You also have healing abilities. You also have spiritual gifts because you are spirit. And they really aren't gifts. They're innate qualities. They're innate versions of you that are waiting for you to step into them. And that's what my work is all about. So, Chrystopher, who am I? Well, if we really want to go back in time a little bit, Chrystopher is a multidimensional, passionate being, and I have been since I was a child. So from the moment I was born, I knew that I was able to sing and talk, but I didn't understand why I wasn't able to. And I have memories of before being able to speak and knowing that I could be able to do that. And I had done that in other times and places. And I did incarnate as a gender fluid, not heterosexual being. Let's just say that. I am a starseed. I am from other times and places and other parts of the galaxy and other star systems and other galaxies. I have access to all of these versions of me, and I think all of that trying to come into one human body was very jarring for me in my first few years. But for most of my life, I was an actor, a singer, a dancer. I went to a performing arts high school. I was a singer for many years. I actually live outside of Atlanta now in my retreat center called StarDust Retreat Center. And Atlanta's a really important area for me because I moved to Atlanta for many reasons, but one of them was music. So this is something that I still will continue to pursue in my human, passionate heart. It needs that. But my spirit has always called me to all things consciousness and beyond the veil, if you will. So when I was a teenager, I was very interested in astrology and very interested in Long Island Medium, crossing over with John Edwards, Lisa Williams, anything to do James Van Praagh, anything to do with psychic mediums, hauntings. I grew up in a family that was very into Halloween and very into spirit and ghosts and all things spooky. I did kind of grow up in that way, and many people in my family and in my household would see spirits in my home or in our home. And I also had many paranormal experiences up to this point, especially in childhood and young adult life. And even though I was interested in consciousness and I didn't believe in Christianity, which was the religion I was given, and I wasn't resonating with all of the messages at church because I wanted to go to church. I went to church with my friends, my aunts, my parents never went, but I wanted to so bad. I wanted that connection with this all-knowing, all-seeing God and to believe in his son and honestly not to go to hell. Okay, that was another reason. I was like, I'm not going there. I can tell you that much. So there was a lot if I look back, that was leading me toward the work that I do and leading me toward stepping into the archetype that I have fully embodied and stepped into. But one of these speed bumps in my journey was around 17, 18, 19 years old. I shifted from a spiritual belief or an interest in metaphysics and consciousness into atheism. And I want to preface that by saying when I was 11 years old, I experienced my first death in the family. And it rocked my world. And I remember having an out-of-body experience on the outside of the casket, staring at the body of my cousin, or who once was my cousin. And from that point forward, I had a belief. And this is really important because I still hold this belief to this day, but I did not. At age 17, I had an experience that moved me out of this and into atheism for a couple years, which was a necessary part of my journey. But at 11 years old, I suddenly was overwhelmed with the sensation and the realization that I was God and that all of this was a dream, and that everything that was happening in front of me and around me was not necessarily real, and that when I died and exited this physical incarnation and body, I would wake up as God, and I would know how to create the universe and how to create planet Earth and all things in the physical universe with more clarity, and I knew that that's why I was here. It was not warm or fuzzy the way it is now. It felt empty and cold and meaningless at times. So from the time I was 11 till I was 17 years old, I very much held that belief, and it did affect me and affect the way I interacted with the world around me and my family. I also, at 17 years old, had a realization that I was an idiot. How could I believe something that ridiculous? I can't believe that I've actually held this belief for so many years. And so I went into a total spiral and entered the world of atheism. And really it was agnosticism because I didn't know what I believed. I still don't know what I believe sometimes, but I hold that as sacred openness rather than doubt and insecurity. And it just felt like the next logical step to believe that there was nothing beyond this physical universe and that it was all really just happening here and that there wasn't anything more. Even though I had felt more, I had seen more, I was interested in more, it just didn't make any sense. And this is also what I want to gift with you all today. If there's anyone listening who is very scientifically based, left brain, logical, analytical, someone who requires proof and does not operate within faith, welcome. You are in good company. I am a psychic medium. I see spaceships. I'm a plant medicine facilitator. I pull energy out of people's bodies, and I still am not faith oriented. I had to have all these experiences myself leading up to this to be able to embody it myself. So I'm encouraging all of you, if you are someone who is that way, if you're someone who has a hard time believing in angels because you haven't had your own experience of it yet, good. Don't just believe in anything because someone has hashtagged it or posted it on social media or told you in a reading that Archangel Michael is there. I was told that many years ago, but I had to have my own experience of him or it, as I do know it to be now, to really experience that. And so atheism in my later teen years was a representation of my higher self's need to not only experience something for itself as a truth, but to experience that and then ground it in physical form. My distaste for the spiritual community in the New Age world and my repulsion toward the love and light, woo-woo types of experiences are a representation of that need for validation. Faith is a beautiful experience. It is just not something that I operate within, and I never have. And that did set the tone for everything else to move forward. I wanted so badly to believe in God. I wanted so badly to believe in Jesus. I wanted so badly to believe in something because I knew I wasn't right. I had to keep myself from going to hell. I'm a feminine. At that time, the only word I had was gay. A feminine, gay boy who wants to sing and dance, who's being picked on, who's being bullied, who's being beat up sometimes, who's also bullying and beating up other people as a result, being bullied and beat up and verbally abused by my own father and my own family in certain ways. There were things that I had growing in me as a child that should not have been growing in a child. It came from other times and places, other lives, reaching into this one, crying out for help, wanting to be seen, shadow aspects of the human consciousness, but also the soul matrix that I am, reaching into this one and asking this incarnation to set all of that free and to make it right. Holy shit. At 7 years old, all I wanted to do was get out of my physical body. At 11 years old, all I knew to do was to wish every single birthday I had, every penny I threw into a fountain. My wish was to not be gay, to not be feminine, to not like the things that I liked. Everything about me was wrong. Everything about me needed to change. And that program ran through me until I was 27 years old, and I'm 32 now, when I really, really had to dig deep into my healing work. And I'm telling you all this because of where it's heading and where it's leading, because many of you all look at spiritual practitioners and spiritual leaders or people who are having a good life even, and wondering, what are they doing? How did they get there? That can't possibly ever be me with the amount of pain, trauma, evil that lives within me. I can tell you right now, you are on the right track. If you're listening to this, you needed to hear it. Spirit led you here. Your higher self led you here. That's another thing you'll hear me say a lot. I use the word spirit in my work, but really what I mean is our higher selves, the universe at large, our ascended masters, our guides, our angels, yes, our ancestors. They're all included in spirit. But we all seem to lack the understanding that it's our higher selves, that all of that spirit energy has to interface through. Our higher self is our gatekeeper, and we are our higher selves. We are our own spirit guide. That's what I'm leading, and that's what my work is all about. So between 17, 19-ish, 20 years old, I experienced what it was like to not believe in anything beyond and to really feel that in my body. It also felt totally wrong. If you're coming to this point and you're listening to this and you realize that that you're agnostic or atheist or you don't know what you believe, good. That's spiritual too. You're not on the wrong path because you are not sure. Yes, there were many things that led me out of that, and maybe that hasn't happened for you yet, but I think it has. There are signs. There were signs the entire time, but there were signs that became totally unmistakable that I could not explain away, that were interacting with me. I started to experience, in 2009, I started to experience street lights going out, mini lights, and it still happens. And they communicate with me. There's a whole community online of people called sliders, and there's a very interesting story about how I came to know what that even is. I didn't know how to explain the fact that every time I drove, especially at night, obviously, because that's when the lights are on, street lights would go out right before I drove under them or when I would look at them, and it was happening multiple times a day or at least once a day. That made me ask some questions. There were about 10 other experiences that happened around then and around that time that really solidified my knowing that something was beyond. And one of them, besides just the lights going out, because I did have conversations with the light too, I still don't know exactly what it is, if it's just my energy field, or if it's my higher self communicating, if it's my higher self in a higher reality using electrical grids to communicate with me here in this virtual reality. I've thought about it all. I've analyzed it to death. It's still one thing I haven't gotten an answer to out of all the times I've asked Spirit and my higher self. It remains a mystery, and I love that because the universe is a mystery. And that was something that even led me into atheism to begin with. And I've asked those lights one night, if this is real, make it happen again. And it did. And I said, if you make it happen one more time, I promise I won't be atheist. And it did. Right as I said that, and the one I was looking at, 3 in a row. And that had never happened before. And I knew in that moment something really spooky and unreal and surreal is happening here. And then my grandmother passed away in 2011, my father's mother. And as we were cleaning out her apartment, I was spiritual again. I got back into astrology. I was practicing meditation, law of attraction. I was easing my way back in at that time. And I found a journal, which I have here somewhere in a box of her stuff. And I was putting a box of stuff together for her, and I found this journal in the bottom of a trash bag full of just stuff that she had thrown in there. And we almost threw it away. I opened up this journal, and there were about 7 pages filled out, and the rest of it was completely empty, and it was dated October 12th, 1993 or something like that. And it's October 16th, 2023. Ooh, that's kind of creepy. It's exactly 30 years ago, right now as we speak. It was like October 12th or 13th is the date in that journal. My grandmother wrote, I just woke up from a dream. It was the most realistic dream I've ever had, and I'm going to give you the cliff notes of what she wrote. She was having a dream, and she was in a car. She was on I-71, which is a highway that runs through Louisville, Kentucky, where we're from, and which this is meaningful. And she's driving on I-71, and suddenly it gets really dark, and she goes off and veers off of the highway into this dark area, and it gets really dark and cloudy, and she finds herself going into the grass and going into a field, and she doesn't know where she is. She somehow gets lost after she gets off of the highway. But it was like something took her off the highway, she said. So she's lost, she's in the middle of this field, and she gets out of her car, and suddenly her mother and her father appear in front of her in spirit, in this dream, and they're dressed in their 1940s, 1950s coat and hat, and they approach her, and my great-grandfather, who I'm named after, reaches out to my grandmother and reaches his hands out, and he says, Paula, are you ready? And she says in that moment, she looked at him and said, what about my babies? And she woke up. She woke up in her house, and she went and got her journal, and she said, I had to write this down because it was the most realistic dream I've ever had. And then the last part of this journal entry states, if anyone ever finds this and reads this, I want you to know that there is an afterlife, there is something beyond, and I now believe for sure, because it was my grandmother who told me when I was a child. I was born in 91, so I was only 2 years old when she had this experience. She told me all growing up that that I didn't need to believe in Jesus, but that she did because she wasn't sure. And I said, well, what if hell actually isn't a place? And my grandmother would say, well, just in case it is, I'm going to believe. She was part of that generation. But that also told me, as a young person or a teenager, that my grandmother didn't know for sure. That made her very human. And that journal entry proved that she didn't know for sure even then what was going to happen to her when she passed away. But she did know from that moment that something was beyond. It wasn't Jesus that came to her, it was her parents. And I knew from that point forward, she always wanted me to find that. I was always supposed to find that. I am the spiritual one in my family. So of course that would be given to me. That is a very sacred moment because from that point forward, I knew I don't have the answers, but there is. I can keep going down this path. It's safe. So I kept going. I climbed the corporate ladder in my 20s. I became very successful working for high-end brands like Giorgio Armani, Clarins, Yves Saint Laurent. I became a regional director. I lived in Chicago and became a health coach. I always worked in plant-based skincare and plant extracts. And then I was a health coach and worked with diets and detoxes and plants again, wheatgrass juice and chlorella and every kind of herb you can imagine to heal cancer and heart disease. And I did that for a while. And all the while I'm playing the 3D game and I'm doing all the right stuff. I'm doing the job. I'm being successful. I'm making the money. I'm in management. I'm high up in corporate environments wearing suits every day. All underneath of that, I still wanted to make music. I was still running around every meeting I had telling people what their rising sign was and their sun sign. And then when I finally admitted to myself, because, you know, at 21 years old, so about a year after, I guess we're really 6 months after my grandmother passed away and I found that journal, I found myself in a relationship, which I had never been in before and still really haven't since, with someone who was a karmic relationship. And I almost danced on past this part. And this is one of the most important chapters in my journey. I was with him for 5.5 months. It was one of the most tumultuous experiences I've ever been through. It was the first time I experienced true depression and anxiety during and after. It was a karmic relationship. I do know that now in retrospect. I had no fucking idea what was going on at the time. And he mirrored everything back to me, and he was every shadow aspect of myself that I have now come to know since, that I didn't think I was. He really was. That karmic relationship totally opened me up, and I started to feel levels of empathy that I had never felt before, and I started to experience chakra openings. So between 2012 and 2015, I was living in Chicago. I moved back to Louisville. There were several different chapters that happened, but during that time, I started meditating, getting into Vedic scriptures, law of attraction. I started to experience third eye opening symptoms, where the center of my forehead would just pulse and feel like such heaviness, and it felt like something was trying to climb out of my forehead. I remember that, and I remember meditation teachers at the classes I would go to telling me that's my third eye opening, and I would roll my eyes and be like, whatever, of course it's my third eye opening. But it wasn't until 2018 rolled around when I experienced my first Kundalini awakening activation. And I want to backtrack just a little bit because when I was 20 years old, that was the first time I signed up for an ayahuasca retreat in Kentucky, because there is a Native American church there that does it. And I started working with psilocybin when I was 21. And when I say working with, I never used it at a party or with other substances. It was always for spiritual purposes or creative and channeling experiences that I would have with friends. So even in my early years, 21, 22, especially when I was 24, 25, 26, I was experimenting quite a bit with psilocybin, and not experimenting, but utilizing and working with psilocybin. I did not know yet about shamanism the way I do now, and I was not initiated yet, if you will. but I was using it with intention and connecting to it in a deep way. I did think I needed it to go into that channeling psychic state. I was told I was psychic when I was 21, when I went to a reading after that relationship, because that relationship in 2012 totally destroyed me at the time, I thought. So I went to see a psychic medium because that's where Chrystopher goes when he has issues. Fuck doctors and psychotherapists. We're going to a psychic medium and a healer, and I've always been that way. Okay? She told me I was a psychic. She told me many things. She told me I was a psychic medium several times, and it just really went over my head. She said, "You know, you can do what I do." And I was just like, sure, but tell me about this guy and when the fuck I'm going to be over this. That was kind of where I was at the time. And so being psychic and you know, being drunk at a party and going up to somebody and guessing their birthday and being right and telling them that their grandmother smells like chocolate and cinnamon, and that triggering a memory for them. And this is an actual experience I had with somebody at a party. And being right, that was happening as well. There were things leading up to this. It wasn't random. But in 2018, I had what would be called a bad trip with psilocybin. I took 9 grams. I didn't realize how much I was taking, and I would never recommend to take that much ever. It's really not necessary. It was absolutely mind-blowing. There was no channeling. There was no me getting with my friends and we're coloring things and me telling them how the nature of the universe operates and how it all works. None of that was happening like normal. It was full on panic, fear, all the shadow stuff, all kinds of trauma coming up. And it did give me PTSD, which I've since healed with psilocybin and other plant medicines like MDMA. So that was pretty incredible, and that happened at the beginning of 2018, and I absolutely needed that experience. It was life-changing and altering because I really thought I was going to die, and I didn't. It actually was a phoenix rising from the ashes moment if I look back. And then about 6 months later, I went through Kundalini Awakening, and they are not directly related. I have asked Spirit and every psychic I've ever met if, at least up to a certain point, if psilocybin was the catalyst for my Kundalini Awakening, because I didn't know at the time what triggered it, like what the hell would make this happen. But it wasn't. But it was a precursor. It was it was showing me everything that Kundalini was going to bring up for me. And for those of you who are not familiar with Kundalini Awakening or Kundalini Rising, please go look that up. There will be an episode about that I make soon. And it will be on this podcast, and any podcast you go that I've been on that you go watch, I'm probably talking about it, or the host is asking me about it. So there's lots of information out there about it, but there's also a lot of bullshit out there about it too. So I've had the experience. Yes, it was terrifying, life-altering, incredible in every single way. And so 2018 saw the creation of an incredible music album that I made with 13 songs on it, of course, because 13 is my favorite number. 7 is also my favorite number. Those are my 2 favorite numbers, and they have been since I was a little kid, especially 13. So you'll notice that much of what I do encompasses the number 13. There are 13 signs in my 5D astrology chart. I hold 13 medicines in my profile, etc. There were 13 songs on this album, and I was making it with my best friend at the time, another karmic relationship and soulmate, who was the platonic female version of the guy that I dated in certain ways. They aren't the same person personality-wise, but I want you to notice that same lesson came back around. Atlanta was always on my radar because of music. We were both planning to move to Atlanta because of the music. And so I was still planning to move to Atlanta at some point, hopefully. But at that time, I was trying not to die because I was fighting suicidal ideation constantly. And this went on for months after too, where I would kind of not plan it out, but think about different places on the planet I could go to do it compassionately, or to, like compassionate suicide, that sort of thing. And I was for real. I was serious about that because I really felt, and it wasn't her leaving me necessarily. It was what I had just gone through. What if it happens again? What if I'm not strong enough next time it happens again and I'm not able to keep myself alive? Or what if I actually do it? What if I do what that feeling or those voices were saying to do? And many of us have been through this, but many of us have not been through this suddenly. It came on suddenly. It was September 28th or 29th, 2018. It just happened suddenly while I was at work. My heart just dropped. I felt a heat rush in my body. It felt like panic, but everything changed. My perception shifted immediately. Everything felt wrong. And from that point forward, I started to experience the myriad of ascension symptoms, but Kundalini rising symptoms. And yeah, I had 12 tabs open on my computer. Epstein-Barr virus, brain cancer, schizophrenia, and the last one was third eye opening symptoms. I did not consider it Kundalini awakening symptoms because what I knew about Kundalini leading up to that point was that you had to prepare for yourself for that, and people went through years and years and years of yoga and meditation and breath work and pranayama and spiritual cultivation to awaken that divine, feminine, ferocious fire energy. Me? Why me? Well, of course, I was also going through between 2018 and 2019 when I went through 2 different explosive Kundalini episodes. Let's just say that. I was going through Uranus square Chiron, Uranus square the Ascendant, Uranus square the Moon, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and Juno, all within that 2-year period between late 2018 and early 2020. Uranus was whooping my ass, and I thank him for it. And Uranus is the ruler of Kundalini energy, and we call him the Great Awakener. Uranus rules Aquarius, and thus is the planet that rules the age that we're moving into. And so it's an incredibly important energy, and that's where we're headed. And of course, Uranus would have such a huge connection to me because of who I am and the archetype that I embody. When that happened and she left, and I moved to Atlanta in early 2019, just on a whim. I decided I'm quitting my job, I'm moving to Atlanta, and I changed my life. And from that point forward, I knew, I remember driving to Atlanta in my U-Haul, which I was locked out of in Louisville. And I'll get to that. But I'm driving and I hear, "You're not moving here for music, you're moving here for spirituality." And I was like, cool. Or it was, "You're moving here for spirituality too." Spirit told me that. And I remember thinking, okay, cool, let's see. And right before I moved to Atlanta, I locked myself out of the U-Haul that I had. And I had another key back at my parents' house for my car. It was actually me. I was locked out of my car, which was with the U-Haul. And I ordered an Uber, and an Uber came and picked me up and took me to my parents' house. And while we're on the way, I'm talking about certain things that I'd been through, and I'm moving to Atlanta, and she just seemed very different to me, and she seemed very open. And so right before I got out of the car, when she dropped me off, I said to her, "Thank you so much, and do you know that you're an empath?" Because the whole empath thing was really strong for me at the time, because although I knew I was an empath for most of my life, I also didn't admit it to myself because I didn't have any proof. Okay. It wasn't until day 21 of not sleeping when I went to see a healer who helped me. And I was able to sleep that night for the first time. She told me, "You're an empath and everything is going to change from this point forward." And she explained to me that empaths aren't people that absorb feelings or feel what other people are feeling like I thought. They're people who can absorb that energy, who can actually take it on, mirror it, and reflect it back. So there was a lot. I kind of just had a sharper eye for someone who would be an empath or that sort of highly sensitive type. So I said to her, "Do you know that you're an empath?" And I was getting out. I was getting out of the car while I was saying that. And she goes, "Do you know that you're a slider?" So I looked at her and I was like, "What's a slider?" She said, "It's somebody who can make street lights go out. Have a good day." I got the fuck up out of that Uber so fast. I was just like, I don't even remember what I said to her because of how blown away I was. But I got out of that car and I immediately got on my phone and I looked up Slider, and it's SLI, streetlight interference. And it's this whole community of people, at least at the time, I haven't researched it since, who claim that they're all, most of them spiritual, many of them are star seeds, many of them say the same thing I used to. It happens when you look at it or when your car is about to pass the light, and usually they said that they're in a very negative or very positive emotional whirlwind. Like if they're celebrating something, it'll go out. If they're really stressed about something, it'll go out. And that's exactly what happened with me. It always happened more when I was amped up, if you will. And so I thought, holy shit, how did she know that? These are the weird, surreal, unreal, cinematic things that have happened in my life. So once I was in Atlanta, that's when I started to realize I had psychic abilities. Whatever the Kundalini experience did for me, one of the things it did was open me up psychically in a way that was unmistakable, and I had to pursue it. It was a dream come true. I always wanted to be a medium since I was a kid. I wanted to do that so badly. I was so obsessed with Teresa Caputo and John Edwards in those types of shows. I wanted it, and I didn't think it could ever be true. I didn't think it was something you could want and have. I didn't realize I truly was. And I went to a mediumship class the week that I moved to Atlanta just to meet people. And I ended up doing a reading for the teacher in that class, and she was blown away. And of course, I was blown away too, because I didn't really know what I had done. I had done it to many people at parties. I'd done it to people at work, but I had never done it on the spot like that in front of someone else who was a psychic medium. Like, she said, "You're going to be paid for this at some point. You need to come take my mediumship course." And I got out of there and I thought she was just trying to sell me something. And I was like, she's full of shit. And from that point forward, spirit started coming to me. I was getting visions. It really expanded after that. She gave me permission to open up more by saying that to me. So I went back to her. And from that point forward, she told me, "You're going to start charging people. You're going to do this for your work." And I was just like, I don't know about that, but I definitely want to pursue it more. Because I just thought I was going to truly be an actor and creator and an artist and be of the world, but had this spiritual ability and these things that I did on the side. That's what I thought. I didn't realize this was going to take center stage and take the spotlight. And then I went through Kundalini activations again in late 2019. And from that point forward, in early 2020, I started my website, ChrystopherMedium.com, in late 2020. So almost 3 years ago now, I started my Instagram, the.astromedium. And that took me very far. I was doing mediumship readings, astrology readings, astro mediumship readings, ascension and awakening coaching. And that was most of the business. I was teaching people, doing classes, workshops. And underneath of all of that was, of course, plant medicine and healing work. For years now, I've been working with plant medicine, and I started working with a plant medicine lineage several years ago and was training with them and started doing retreats, started bringing people into the experience. But again, it was something I never thought I could actually do. I thought I had to wait in line. I was told I had to wait in line, actually. You have to wait several years. You have to do this for 10 years before you're able to hold the medicine. You have to go do this. You have to go do that. So I started doing those things. I trained with this shaman. I trained with that shaman. I started taking that course. I'm very scientific. So when it came to all of the medicine, chemicals and chemistry and contradictions and all that stuff, that was so easy for me. But it was the spiritual basis, holding space, ceremony, rituals, really stepping into that shamanic archetype. I really resisted that, and the astro medium was just something that I felt encompassed what I did at the time, but it no longer does. So the astro medium played its role and has expired within me. I feel complete with the astro medium. Now that you know who I am, let's talk about the wounded healer. So, in my astrology journey, Chiron has shown up many times, obviously. When I was 18, I started going to the Astrological Society of Kentucky's meetings in Louisville, Kentucky. Ask is what they call themselves. And Mary Keswani, one of the best astrologers in the entire world who lives in Louisville, Kentucky, was at every single meeting, and she and I gravitated towards each other. And she just had a glance and look at my chart, and she said several things at the time that made me go, whoa. But Chiron was one of those energies that came up. And Mary said to me back when I was 18 that you're Chiron. And I was like, the fuck is a Chiron? I still don't know what a Venus does. I need to, before you get to these asteroids and these balls of dirt floating around out there, I mean, I really resisted a lot of newer astrological energies. If I don't understand something and don't have the science for it up to that point, I really can resist it. I now no longer resist it. I just hold it as possibility and hold it in my awareness, and just don't hold it as a belief. I hold it as an opportunity or an option, which feels much better to me. It doesn't have to be yes or no. It can be yes and. And that is what this universe is all about. And that's where Chiron comes in, because yes, Chiron is the wounded healer. And so when I would look into that Chiron archetype, I would be like, ugh, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be a wounded healer. That sounds awful. So I just let it go. And in my journey, it just kept showing up again, because in my astrology chart, I have Chiron, the asteroid, conjunct or joined up with my ascendant, the rising sign. Any planet, and Mary Keswani told me this many, many years ago, any planet that is joined up or conjunct with your ascendant within 8 degrees, especially if it's in the first house, not the 12th, but especially if it's in the first, you embody that archetype. If Saturn is at 2 degrees of Capricorn in your chart and your rising sign is 0 degrees of Capricorn, you have Saturn conjunct the rising sign, which means you are Saturn. And not that you are Saturn. I shouldn't say that you are completely, but you embody the Saturn archetype. Saturn is a huge key player in your chart. So in my chart, I have Cancer rising, which colors the entire chart, but my Cancer rising is even more sensitive because it's infused with Chyronic energy. So although Chiron is known as the wounded healer in astrology and traditional mythology, I'm here to take him to the 5th dimension, because I am him in many ways. I embody Chiron. So let me introduce you to Chiron. Let's first talk about Chiron with an I, Chiron, which you will know about and hear about most when you research this archetype. In traditional mythology, Chiron was a centaur. Many people don't realize that the constellation Sagittarius actually is Chiron. And here's the story of Chiron. Chiron was the one and only centaur who was soft, gentle, sweet, feminine even, if you will, creative, introspective. Centaurs, half men, half horse, or half human, half horse, I should say. Hybrid beings. They were known for being barbaric savages, very tribal beings, and Chiron was not. Chiron really leaned into his human side and was, yes, he was a healer, but he was a teacher. We all know him to be the wounded healer, but he was many things. Chiron was out of everything else, he was a teacher. He was the teacher and tutor to Heracles, who eventually shot him accidentally in the leg during one of their training sessions. And because Chiron was immortal, that moment was life-changing for him, because he was brilliant in every other way. Chiron was an astrologer. He was a medium. He was also an herbalist. He was very interested in herbal remedies. He was very witchy. He was a healer, teacher, astrologer, herbalist, and medium, or plant medicine holder. I had to realize in my journey that everything that Chiron is and was, I am, including being wounded heavily. And what Mary Kaswani told me was, what this means is that not only are you Chiron, but you carry your wounds on your sleeve and display them to the world for everyone to see. And she said, and it's very sensitizing and vulnerable for you. Very brings a lot of insecurity, brings a lot of body shame, body dysmorphia, attractiveness issues. And I have dealt with all of this because my wound is to my physical body and my appearance and my persona, the rising sign. That's where it is housed in my chart. And fuck, have I not experienced all of that. But what I realized was that Chiron's story is not done. In the Chiron mythological story, Chiron approaches Prometheus, which is a role I played in high school. What a turn of events this has been. Prometheus was also immortal like Chiron. And Prometheus, every day, this bird comes down and eats his organs and it regrows, and he has to go through that every single day. He's bound, Prometheus bound. And he's being punished for something that he's done. And Chiron implores Zeus and asks Zeus basically to trade places with Prometheus and wants to make it right. And that's why he's known as the wounded healer, because for eternity, if he had not exited his physical body, Chiron would have been eternally wounded because he was no longer able to walk, or he was not as mobile as he was before. So he represents the idea of the healer who is constantly seeking to heal others in search of healing self, or in the pursuit of healing self. And Rumi, the great poet, once said that the wound is where the light enters you. And so calling Chiron the wounded healer served us up until a point. But as we move out of the third dimension and into the fifth dimension, or out of duality and into unity consciousness, the Chiron archetype will continue on with us, but it must change. It must transmute. That is what the Chiron archetype represents, is transmutation and alchemy. Chiron rules the earth sign Virgo. And Virgo is the earth alchemist, the white witch. She is a keeper between realms. And Chiron in astrology is known as the rainbow bridge. This was coined by Barbara Handclough in her book, Chiron, the Rainbow Bridge. But in the story of Chiron, once Chiron, in his wounded healer pursuit, gave up his immortality for Prometheus, Chiron was rewarded by Zeus. Prometheus was allowed to die, and his eternal torment was ended. And Zeus allowed Chiron to pass away as well. And he emblazoned Chiron's energy in the sky as Sagittarius in honor and memoriam of him. So there is hope at the end of this Chiron archetype, because this wounded healer, many astrologers would tell me over the years, your Chiron energy can never totally be healed, but it can get better. And I said, fuck that. You know why? Because that does not compute. The healing process never ends, but the pain does, the suffering does, and I'm here to hold that torch and to be the rainbow bridge. So I realized in my process, I had a responsibility. I am Chiron. One of my responsibilities was to be really wounded and to hold wounding very strongly in my energy, and I've done so and continue to do so, not just of my own, but of others, because Chiron is the shaman. Shamans are gatekeepers between realms. They dance the tightrope. They walk the tightrope between the darkness and the light, the living and the non-physical realms, this dimension and the next. And because Zeus rewarded Chiron, I take that as our higher self or our God self, rewarding us by making us immortal. That's what the ascension process is about. So in 1977, when this astronomer located this exact asteroid between the orbit of Saturn and Uranus, his child actually is the one, or his daughter is the one who named this asteroid Chiron. And once this asteroid became named Chiron, its energetic, mythological, archetypal blueprint was then solidified and made readily available within our consciousness and in the solar system. And that is how astrology works. From 1977 and on, we began to see an increase in the interest in alternative healing modalities. This is when Reiki healing, shamanic practices that were lost for thousands and hundreds of years began to come back into our sphere. Plants and plant-based healing and plant-based foods began to rise. And Chiron is the healing energy that we're looking for. But remember, healing can be going from joy to bliss, from contentment to excitement. That's a healing. If you're taking, technically that is a raise in frequency, but a healing is restoring to its natural state. And your natural state is not here in this false matrix, playing this game of density and duality. That is not who you really are. So in this process, I am here to take Chiron from Chiron to Chyron. So I decided to start spelling Chiron with a Y, just as I started to spell many things with a Y, because I realized when you look at the letter I and the letter Y, I represents the ego and the self, and the one energy that is you. Okay? And it could represent the all, but it represents the singular organism that you are. But Y represents that singular organism, even from the way it looks, opening up its arms to spirit, to something higher than itself, and letting that in. There's a lot more to that I and Y conversation that I won't go into. But Chiron with a Y is the shaman and the rainbow bridge. So what's really interesting about astrology, whether it's real or not, whether it has an effect on you or not, which we'll talk about that on this podcast quite a bit as well. What's interesting is that the entire solar system and the meaning we've given to it and the names and the archetypes that flow through all of those planetary energies is a story in and of itself. It's a chain reaction starting from the sun working its way out. When you get to Jupiter and Saturn in the chart, you're really working with expansion and contraction. That restriction from Saturn really holds everything in place. While Jupiter's expanding your horizons, your belief systems, it represents your higher mind, your outlook on life, that more spiritual belief about things, that something has meaning. And then Saturn comes in and goes, but how do we make it real? How do we crystallize, materialize, and realize that which you have expanded into? So Saturn, although his energy can be quite controversial, is needed in that way. And Saturn is the lord of karma. And karma is a conversation that will come up in my sphere quite a bit and on this podcast, because I believe that karma is a false matrix program to keep us in loops, to keep us incarnating here and never actually creating our own reality from scratch. Only using archetypes and templates and things already given to us. A matrix inside of another matrix, which is a copy and super densified to keep us in a program. But Saturn is very, very necessary. And as the Lord of Karma, he's also Father Time. So Saturn represents physical reality and how that holds itself in place, structure, form. Saturn is really the rigidity of everything that is here, including the illusion of time and that process of karma, as Saturn represents cause and effect from a linear time-space reality perspective. And Saturn rules Capricorn. So there is something real. And Capricorn brings things to an apex point, to the summit. But where do we go from that point? Once we've reached Saturn, to the Vedic astrologers and many ancient astrologers, those were the 7 sacred planets. That was it. It ended at Saturn. But we know now, thanks to our telescopes and science, that there are other planets out there. There are not only other planets in this solar system, there's other planetoids in this solar system, i.e. these incredible asteroids, which we'll talk about. Once you reach Saturn, the next planet traditionally after that is Uranus, which represents the age of Aquarius, new timelines, future possibilities, innovation, technology, awakening. Uranus represents or rules electricity, things moving in an electrical nature. And so it strikes you when least expected. It can be shocking. There can be a surprise with Uranus energy. You're not expecting it, but it's what you needed. It sets you down a path of more authenticity and more of who you really are. And that's what Aquarius represents. That's what this age of Aquarius represents, is more unity and individuality at the same time. But how do you get from that old, structured, patriarchal, cause and effect type of reality? How do you get from that rigid, restricted, Saturnian reality to that new, multidimensional, future possibility? How do you get from the old age that we're in now to this new age of Aquarius? Well, you have to cross the rainbow bridge. And poetically, it's beautiful because Chiron lives between Saturn and Uranus in its orbit for most of the time. It takes 50 years for Chiron to get around the sun. And Chiron literally acts as a rainbow bridge between the old paradigm and the new age. And so as an embodiment of Chiron, I am the rainbow bridge. I am a shaman, if you will. That's what a Chyronic healer is. A Chyronic healer is someone who embodies the Chiron archetype, who is a hybrid being, man and woman in one person. Chyronic healers are usually 2 spirits in the Native American tradition. In Native American lore and culture, the 2 spirit is considered the 3rd gender. I do not and am not calling myself a 2 spirit, although I do have tons of Cherokee in me. You hear tons of white people saying, I'm a 1/32nd Cherokee princess. Well, of course you are. I'm not trying to appropriate, and I'm not trying to take something that is sacred to that tribe or those tribes and those people and appropriate it as my own. But I do very much resonate with the idea of a 2 spirit, and I very much feel on an energetic spiritual level that I hold that energy signature. Let's just say that. Chyronic healers are hybrid beings, like a centaur. They are healers, energy healers, by default, naturally. They are quite wounded, but also they have been healing that within themselves. They're natural teachers. They're gurus. They want to teach and share and perform. Chyronic healers, because they are shamans, are usually storytellers, singers, dancers, creatives in some way, because that's what we use to hold our ceremony, call the spirits in, and keep the space. Chyronic healers are also astrologers. They're interested in plant medicine, herbs, flower essences, essential oils. Chyronic healers are also psychic mediums. So under the Chyronic healing umbrella are all of those different, seemingly different modalities and gifts coming together, coalescing to create a very powerful shamanic archetype that is really here to usher in this 5th dimensional frequency. And that's what I'm here to do, is really hold the space for you energetically, spiritually, and even physically at times, to allow you to tap into your own innate gifts and abilities down to a DNA level, so that you can activate your 13th sign and enter the 13th house. Because in 5D astrology, which is the astrology that I've downloaded, there is something beyond Pisces, And it is not the 13th sign in Vedic astrology that lives close to the Scorpio constellation on the ecliptic. It is different. The 13th house in 5D astrology, and there will be an episode about this later, is all about empty space, infinite potential, dark matter. And remember, there's dark matter and empty space in every single one of your atoms. And you're made of trillions and trillions of atoms. So that quite literally translates to you are trillions and trillions of black holes. This means that you're able to travel within the multidimensionality of this universe at any time, but you're kept restricted. You're held in this linear time-space reality by certain objects in the sky, by certain beings from other universes and star systems, by your own inability to be aware, by your tendency to stay asleep. If you're listening to this, you most likely have awakened in some way, whether it was energetic, mental, emotional. There's different types of spiritual awakening. But if you have reached this point, I am calling you up and toward this fifth dimensional frequency. You are ready. Maybe it's time you go to a retreat. Maybe it's time to work with the spirit of ayahuasca. Maybe it's time to microdose. Maybe it's time to do that neurolinguistic programming session. Maybe it's time to sit quietly and do some meditating for the first time in your life. Everyone is where they are in their process. But I'm asking you, the time is now. It is time to step up into your gifts. It is time to join the party. And stepping up into your gifts and becoming spiritual does not mean that you start your own business, that you start hashtagging everything 5D and Ascension. Being spiritual does not mean that you have an entire collection of crystals and you sage your house on every full moon. Fuck all of that. Being spiritual is about you coming into alignment with your soul's purpose and your soul's frequency. Being spiritual is you being able to be quiet and observe life and feel totally in your physical body without trying to escape it. Being spiritual is being in the present moment and liking it. Being spiritual is not having more information than someone else and needing to share it with them. Being spiritual and being awakened does not also mean that you have to now go awaken others. This is a process. You have to do it, and it will trigger you. It will scare you. It will, maybe for a couple years, feel like maybe you did the wrong thing. Maybe I shouldn't have gone to that retreat. Maybe I shouldn't have done that healing session. Maybe I shouldn't have found out what was in my human design chart, because now I know and I wish I didn't. I've had that feeling, and I still do sometimes. Once I knew what was happening with the moon, it was my responsibility to start reading the chart differently and to ask Spirit, what do I do with this? And I downloaded the answer. So, although I do not feel complete, there's many more conversations to be had. There's so much more to expand into. I do feel complete on the topic tonight. I just want to let everyone know, if you are wanting to work with me, you can go to theastromedium.com or soon ChrystopherKyng.com. That's Christopher with a Y and King with a Y. All of this will be listed in the show notes below. I offer plant medicine experiences privately here at StarDust Retreat Center. I have group experiences, luxury retreats all over the country, Sedona, Georgia, Mount Shasta coming up. I hold cacao ceremonies, Blue Lotus day retreats. I am an astrologer. I offer one-to-one astrology readings, Ascension and Awakening coaching, spiritual sessions of many kind. My website is being revamped right now, and a lot of my work is transitioning into, it's evolving, it's progressing, and so I'm still fermenting in a lot of that as I'm making this video, but I am here to assist you. You can follow me on social media, Chrystopher Kyng, ChrystopherKyng, and I'll talk about that King archetype in another episode soon. But there are many ways to reach me and find me. You can also reach out directly if there's something specific you want to work with me on, whether it's mentorship or stepping into your gifts, becoming a medicine facilitator yourself. I hold 13 different medicines in my Chyronic healing medicine profile. I am the creator of MycroDos, which is a blend of 5 different microdosing protocols. I am the owner of StarDust Retreat Center, and so I have many resources for you and many ways for you to heal, step into your gifts, and to join this incredible coven that I've created, of course, with a Y, COVYN, of over 100 people so far who are in my community and in my circle, who come to ceremonies and retreats and integration calls and healing socials. There is an incredible high vibe, 5D level tribe just waiting for you if you feel called. And I appreciate you trusting in me. I am sending you so much love, and here's to our journey into the 5th dimension. Thank you for joining me on Chronicles of Chyron. We'll see you next time.